Hello, welcome to Lazada Insider, featuring knowledge that makes a difference. We share trusted insights, forward-looking perspectives, and exclusive expert interviews to keep you ahead of the curve.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lazada Insider, and I'm your host, Katrina from Lazada. The last 2 years have been a roller coaster ride for FMCG businesses. But opportunity arises from crisis, and the sector has been learning, innovating, and tapping into the pandemic-induced trends such as stay-at-home economy, health and well-being, and so on. But to continuously grow and to maintain competitive, FMCG companies need to further capitalize on the new emerging opportunities in the coming years. And that is what we're going to discuss today with our expert guest, Craig Houliston from NielsenIQ. And he's the Regional Executive Director of Asia Regional Analytics and Insights. He comes with almost 15 years of experience at NielsenIQ. And in fact, he was featured in one of the very first few episodes of Lazada Insider last year. So it's really great to have you back, Craig.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us a bit more, what have you been busy with recently?
Well, actually, I've been busy traveling. So yesterday I was in Malaysia. Today I'm in Singapore, and tomorrow I'll be in Philippines. So it's been quite busy traveling. But again, I feel very grateful that we can now travel again. And it's great to meet clients and colleagues. So yes, all is good for me.
Well, that's very good to hear. Maybe let's dive right into today's topic. Let's talk about the overall category growth dynamics in the FMCG sector. What are your latest observations?
Well, actually, what we're seeing is that things are still very dynamic with regard to fast-moving consumer goods. So the last 2.5 years have probably been the most dynamic, or you could say volatile, that we've ever seen in this region. So again, we've seen record growth for some categories and record declines for others. And we are starting to see more of a stabilization. However, we do find that there are some longer-term trends that we're observing in the market. So if we look at the different super categories, there are definitely some which are seeing longer-term growth. These being areas such as OTC and health supplements, frozen foods, pet care, and packaged food. So again, we are seeing this trend still not slowing down too much, and these are highlighting that these could be potential longer-term trends that come out of this COVID.
That's very interesting dynamics. So if we further look at the categories that were able to drive high growth, the few that you mentioned, OTC, health supplements, pet-related products, frozen food, and so on, what do you think are actually the key drivers for the growth of those categories?
So I think there's a long-term and a short-term view of it. So I think if we take from a short-term perspective, definitely the restricted living has had a big factor. And given the fact that we are now living in a hybrid world where even companies which are moving back to people working back in the office are stating that it may only be 2 to 3 days, and there's an acceptance that there could be more of a longer term effect. So with that, there naturally will be a benefit to categories such as packaged food and frozen, where people will be cooking more, whether it's 1 meal, 2 meal, 3 meal, there will be natural shift towards more people consuming more at home. You could also argue that with regard to pets, that has been a natural benefit. There are, if you look at the prices of getting pets, it's still very high. It's coming down a bit, but obviously people are looking for companionship now that they're spending more and more time at home. So I think that's been the key driver. And I guess what we probably want to say at the moment is there's still a degree of uncertainty. Given, we thought we were coming out of COVID. Now we're seeing the rise of these new subvariants of BA4 and BA5, etc. Even today you're seeing news of Australia, Anhui in China and Singapore highlighting that there are an increase in cases. So again, there is a degree of uncertainty, and with that, we would assume that people will start shifting a bit more of a restricted living, as they might be a bit more nervous going out. The other trend that we were seeing is more of a longer term trend. So again, even before COVID, we were seeing that health and wellness was the big trend with regard to this region. And obviously COVID has just further exacerbated this, because again, health and wellness is now definitely top of people's mind, but it was always going to be the case, because with regard to Asia, I think naturally within our DNA, people are a bit more health conscious. When there are tough times in terms of the economy, people don't go to naturally more of the sinful categories, which happens in Europe and the US. They tend to still snack, but maybe a bit more healthier. And we definitely were seeing this trend that people really do care about health and wellness. And I think that this is going to be one of the key areas, especially with regard to consumer health.
Interesting sharing. Now, if you look at the other end of the spectrum, let's say those product categories that were more of a declining or stable kind of trend in the past 2 years, do you have any good news for any of these categories? Do you foresee any of them expecting a big demand comeback in 2022 and beyond?
Yes. So I think that when we look at the categories which have been struggling a bit more, it tends to be those which might be a bit more impulse, which would be things such as beverage and snacking, and also things like beauty and cosmetics, as people haven't been going out. So anything which has been quite dependent on people going out and having unrestricted living, have been most impacted. What we are seeing from a NielsenIQ perspective is things are bouncing back. And actually, over the last year or so, we have seen that return, but it hasn't yet got back to the pre-COVID levels. And obviously, that's very dependent on the fact that you still rely on people going out to consume. So again, if we take a perspective such as beauty and cosmetics, yes, things in a market like Singapore, you can now sample and you can try beauty and fragrances, etc., which is big, because again, that is a key part of people's decision making in terms of trying to do that. So again, where we are seeing markets open up, there is start to be a rebound. However, with regard to beauty and cosmetics, we also need to be cognizant to the fact that it's heavily reliant on travel, and travel retail is very important. So again, with the fact that mainland Chinese people cannot travel, that has a profound impact on that on Southeast Asia region. When we look at the beverage and snacking, they have had to adapt somewhat. Obviously, with the shift to e-commerce, it's naturally, they've had to shift in terms of their product portfolios, etc. However, a lot of consumption is still impulse for those products. When you look at snacking products and beverages, a lot of it will be getting those people who just buy the category once or twice a year. That is the majority of sales come from that. So again, if people are not going out and about and picking up that carbonated soft drink or picking up that bar of chocolate, then they have to think more creatively about how they can innovate to try to overcome that. And I think that links to what we were talking about earlier with respect to health and wellness. This is where these companies are looking to invest and where they will innovate more. So again, if you just look from a merger and acquisition perspective, you can see a lot of acquisitions where they're trying to move into healthier snacking or healthier beverages. When you look at the potential challenges that we face, with legislation, later this year in Singapore, the government's going to implement Nutrigrade labeling. So all the beverages have to have a label which says A, B, C, D, and it'll clearly articulate whether this beverage is healthy enough to consume. So it's taking the labeling to the next level beyond the healthier choice. But what's actually happening is that there'll be restricted media in terms of for those brands. So it's definitely meaning that those categories which do want to drive further growth will need to try to adapt to the new tastes and the new norms.
1 year ago on Lazada Insider, you mentioned that, consumers were more comfortable with buying FMCG products online. And if they're shopping offline, they might also choose a more convenient location. So are those trends still valid? And what are your latest kind of observations on the shifts of the shopping channels for FMCG products?
Yes, so definitely e-commerce is definitely continuously growing. So again, we see the fastest growth coming from e-commerce, and it's relentless. It's not stopping. So again, we have seen that tipping point that we talked about last year, that consumers have those who are not converted to e-commerce are starting to to definitely buy more and more online. And what we're seeing with regard to Asia is now that e-commerce is now the second biggest channel in Asia. So it now accounts for nearly 20% of all FMCG sales. So it's worth noting that traditional trade, which are your mama stores, your sari stores, or your provision stores, these are still 45% because there are millions of them across the region. However, e-commerce is definitely now the second biggest player and is growing. And obviously, this offers a lot of great opportunity with regard to for the consumer to consume more. And actually, the trend is that what we're seeing is things like convenience is what they're looking for. But they're also looking for value for money, low prices. They're looking for wide range of stock and also fresh. And actually, when you look at those trends, that really resonates a lot with e-commerce, because when people are looking to save money, when we survey people in Asia, they're stating that the first thing they do is they look online. So again, with the challenging economy, etc., people will start to go online to look for better deals, whether it be absolute low prices or value for money. And I think value for money is an important concept to understand. It's very different to low pricing. Value for money just means that you're justifying paying that premium. So again, what we can see from NielsenIQ data is a lot of people will go online to buy better products, but at better prices. So they're still trying to get that better experience or trying to buy more, but they recognize that this might be the best place that I can get a deal. So again, definitely e-commerce is, from a channel perspective, is the long-term winner that we're seeing.
How about convenience stores and supermarket and all these other channels? Do you see that there is a flow back in terms of the traffic?
Yeah, I think that these channels are still very strong. It's not like they're falling off a cliff, etc. They're very established, and I think what we need to see is it's all complementary. That the rise of e-commerce doesn't necessarily mean the decline of the supermarkets or convenience stores, because they have different purposes. And again, when someone does want to buy a beverage, after a run, etc., they probably will go to that convenience store. However, they may have gone to Lazada to find that information because, in terms of learning about new brands, etc., could have been part of their decision tree in terms of their knowledge. So, and again, like we say, hypermarkets, supermarkets definitely do play an important role, especially when they're in a convenient location. That's what we're seeing. So that trend of convenience is still very important. So again, e-commerce is convenient. Traditional trade is convenient. Hypermarket can be convenient if it's 24 hours, and a convenience store is obviously more convenient. So actually, with regard to NielsenIQ, we actually see 4 trends when it comes to retail: convenience, experience, expertise, and omni-channel. So what we're actually saying is that these were trends that we were actually seeing before COVID. We were seeing convenience, experience, expertise, and omni-channel. What's happened is it's just evolved. So with regard to convenience, again, in the past, we were talking about convenience stores, etc. Now it's more like convenience can be contactless. It can be cashless. It can be even customerless stores. Even with regard to offline, you're going to get stores where there won't even be customers, but they will be more distribution channels for delivery companies. We're seeing in parts of Asia things like micro-fulfillment centers coming through. Again, that urge for convenience. So again, in the past, convenience could be I get something in a day's time. Now it's going to be like a few hours' time. And in some parts of Asia and Korea, we're seeing demand that has to be delivered to me within 15 minutes. So again, the retail channels are evolving, and even things like cross-border apps, coming through that convenience. Now I can't travel as much as the past. How do I sell? So again, e-commerce can facilitate that. That it's a way that people can get the products from the UK, France, Australia, India at ease without having to travel. So again, that's from a convenience perspective. When we look at experience, this is obviously evolving into things like the metaverse and live streaming. So again, from our understanding with regard to this part of Southeast Asia, live streaming is still more on entertainment, but it's evolving more into commerce. And obviously, when we look at China, that's obviously the best learning. So from that experience perspective, live streaming still has an opportunity where we think that can facilitate. And it can be a mixture of that entertainment and commerce, which then leads on to the metaverse, which is obviously the hot topic. People talk about Web3, etc. And yeah, well, we are starting to see this coming through, that people are starting to put foray into the metaverse as an experience. Again, a way to try to connect, whether it's gaming, information, shopping together, and offering something new. So I think that from that perspective, that's really exciting. So I guess that from a lot of retailers will be trying to make the most of this to try to engage with the consumer. And then that kind of leads on to expertise. So expertise, again, people want knowledge, as you mentioned. Whether it's the internet or e-commerce sites, there's a lot of information out there. So people want that expertise. So they want to have knowledge when they make that decision, whether it's reading reviews or talking to an expert in that field who can explain why this infant nutrition product is better for my baby than that one, or this cosmetics product is better for my skin than that one. So going to retailers who have expertise and trust will be very important. It's also worth noting that we're saying within NielsenIQ, people are looking for eco. But when we say eco, we're talking not just about economical, but ecological. So it's two ways. So from economical, as mentioned, people are more constrained and they will be looking for better deals. But people are also very looking for sustainability. A lot of people do care about the environment and do want to shop at retailers which are demonstrating this, whether it's reduced packaging or carbon offsetting, etc. Or even, to be honest, like you could even go further in terms of companies who are doing good for the community. I think that is still an important part. And then last but not least is omnichannel. So again, omnichannel, obviously e-commerce is the key driver of that, but definitely things like community buying coming through. Obviously, that's a trend which started in China, but is starting to penetrate the rest of the region. But also with regards to even things like, as I was kind of building on from that expertise, retailers who are really giving back to society, whether it's things like helping out hawkers and heartlands like Lazada's doing, these kind of initiatives is omnichannel. It's really showing how the e-commerce and online infrastructure is helping those who may not have benefited because of restricted living. So this is what we believe that will continue. And it's great that companies at Lazada can be at the forefront of this.
You mentioned a bit on the economical part of consumers' needs. So a potential challenge I would like to discuss, and perhaps is top of mind of many businesses and consumers, is the rise of the global and regional inflation. So first, if you look at from consumer perspective, the rising inflation actually start to have an impact on them.
Yes, so definitely you're right. Inflation is top of mind for everyone, whether we're talking to manufacturers or retailers. This is going to be the biggest challenge over the next few years. So from a consumer perspective, yes, we are seeing that challenge. That I think around 35% of Asians that we survey are stating that they are cautious in terms of their consumption. And around 50% are stating that they have noticed that prices have increased. So again, consumers they're not oblivious to this. And again, it goes back to the fact that, with e-commerce, people are trained to look at price. People in the past may not have felt it as much because they may not have had the access to as much knowledge. Now, because of the rise of e-commerce is a way for people to compare. So when they go to the offline store, they can look online and compare the price, and they can go to multiple websites to do it, etc. So I think naturally people are a bit more trained than in the past in terms of how much does a loaf of bread cost, etc. So there is definitely that challenge. And with regard to COVID, I think that just further accentuates it because things have been tough for many people. So from a consumer perspective, we are noticing those challenges. However, it's worth noting that from NielsenIQ data, we do see that for certain categories, people still are willing to trade up, and that links to what we sharing at the start, that when it comes to things like health, wellness, pets, or babies, etc., we still see a degree of trade up. What's quite interesting is that maybe in the past, when we were talking probably a year ago, when we talked about trade up in baby, it was maybe more to super premium. What we're seeing now, it could be more around that everyday premium. So again, people are constrained, but they're still looking for good products. But they will have to make some difficult decisions, given the fact that inflation is just going to be so profound across not just FMCG, but many aspects of their life.
And then if, let's say, the inflation pressure further sustained, because there are still quite some uncertainty out there, how do you foresee the consumer will actually respond to it?
With regard to FMCG, a lot of the basics are increasing in price. So when we look across the region, for most countries, cooking oil is increasing 20 to 30% because of the challenges, whether it be poor harvests, the challenge of the war in the Ukraine. These are having long-term effects. And we need to bear in mind that if there's a 20% increase of cooking oil, that has a knock-on effect onto things like chocolate and noodles, which have oil within it. So I think that the challenge that we're reading a lot about increasing prices for rice, noodles, bread, these basics of people's consumption are increasing at least 10% in many parts of Southeast Asia. So this is going to have a real impact, because at the same time, it's not as though people's salaries are increasing at that level. So what it will mean is that people will have to make some choiceful decisions. Whether it's trying to look for alternative brands. Again, as I mentioned at the start, when we actually survey people in Asia, what they've tried to do when they have a constrained budget, the first thing they do is to look online for a better deal. However, the next thing is to try to look at something which is a lower priced product in their repertoire. And the repertoire means that it doesn't just mean that they look at the whole shelf and go, this is the cheapest product, I buy whatever's cheapest. They will take into consideration what are the brands that they will be looking for. So there might be certain brands where they go, I wouldn't buy that because for whatever reason, it could be the quality, it could be the benefits, etc. But there will be comparable ones. And that might lead to more people buying private label. We are starting to see more private label come through on the shelves where there's a definite communication where it's implying that it's as good as the branded alternative. So I think that will be one area where people will start to change. And I think also could mean that people might start thinking about switching categories in terms of looking for dropping certain categories and moving to others. So again, people will have a more restricted budget, but people will need FMCG products, and they will still need things to treat themselves. They will still need things to help them live healthier lives. But it just means that they might have to sacrifice or downtrade in other categories.
Then that means that for businesses and brands in FMCG industry, they really need to look at, the consumers' purchasing power and design their portfolios accordingly. And like what you mentioned, the brand is still an important consideration factor. So that means that, the companies and sellers and brands, they still need to, engage with consumers to build that familiarity and brand experience at the same time. So that's very interesting sharing. Maybe let's look at this whole inflation from business point of view. So what is the impact of inflation on the companies in this sector?
Yes, I think that there's no doubt that businesses are also facing that challenge. And I think that the reality is that there will be rising costs of goods. I think that whether it's because of raw material, reverse migration of employment, rising salaries, etc. There's many different factors. So it's not possible to avoid inflation. I think that no one's going to not be impacted from it. So again, with regard to companies, that there will be these challenges. And what we hope is that it won't necessarily mean that it gets passed on to the consumer, because obviously, that is the worry of the consumer, is that they read a lot about the challenges all around the world, and that they're starting to see that their prices are starting to increase. However, I think obviously the consumer needs help from the manufacturers to ensure that it's a manageable increase. So what we're seeing is that companies need to try to think about how to be more efficient. That's a reality. If there is a rising cost of goods, then if you pass everything on to the consumer, then everyone will lose out, and there will, people will have to make choiceful decisions, etc., and it can make things a lot more difficult. So what we're starting to see is that companies are starting to use a lot more data to make decisions. So really trying to analyze the strategy, whether it be try to make sure that the pricing is right or the promotions are right. Because again, if your raw materials are increasing 10%, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pass the full 10% onto the consumer, because what you can do is you can look at ways to be more efficient internally, whether it be trying to optimize your promotions so that you can work out what is the right frequency and depth of promotion, or it could be in terms of trying to understand more about what is the impact if I increase by 5% or 6%. What will that have on my volume, and whether I can try to be a bit more optimal in terms of my revenue management. So again, there's so much data out there. We do believe within NielsenIQ that making data-based decisions will be the key thing for people to do to come out of it. Because I think if companies go blindly in terms of just putting their prices up, exorbitantly, etc., when we come out of this, they might not be in a healthy position.
Thank you for advice. So we might have time for the last piece of advice from you. What would be your last thought that you want to leave for our audience?
Okay, so I think that the trends we've kind of touched on about e-commerce continuously growing, consumer health, inflation, the reality is that these are probably going to be the headlines for the next few years. It's not going to go away. So though that being said, it's constantly evolving. So again, e-commerce now is very different to e-commerce a couple of years ago, and it's going to be very different to e-commerce in probably like a year's time, because it's constantly evolving to meet the consumer's needs. And again, as you mentioned, people are utilizing e-commerce for everything. It's not just shopping; it's knowledge, etc. It's trying to find that information. With consumer health, that links onto that, because people are wanting more and more expertise and better products for their health. So again, they want to shop in retailers which have that expertise and they can trust that it's the right product. So then goes on to inflation. Inflation is going to be here for the next few years. This is not because of Ukraine. It's not just because of rising shipping costs or bad harvests. There are profound longer-term impacts which are leading to inflation, such as climate change. So again, this is not going to go away. So what I would recommend is try to be aware of the data in terms of what's happening and what you need to do, and try to strategize and think about how you can continuously strategize in terms of how you can win in this market. Because if you're not thinking about how you're going to win in e-commerce, how you're going to cater for the growing consumer health needs, and if you don't have a plan for the rising inflation, then companies will be in a lot of trouble.
Thank you so much, Craig, for the great sharing with us. It's really great to have you back on Lazada Insider.
Thank you very much, and hopefully I can come a third time.
This is Lazada Insider. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you click follow and subscribe so you don't miss our latest insights and expert interviews. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, take care.